Well, I'll begin in the same place that Honneth begins, though, as I say, I have all sorts of differences with his approach to the tradition, but that's with perhaps my favourite figure in the whole history of social thought, and that's Rousseau. And it's helpful to start with Rousseau's three discourses. This is the sort of early Rousseau before he writes the social contract. The most famous of these is the second discourse, the discourse on the origin of inequality, and that's the one that's most powerful for our purposes. But if we start with Rousseau's first discourse, the first discourse is, I think, an extraordinary text. It's an attempt to answer the question, has the progress of arts and sciences improved the world? In other words, you might say glibly, is this thing called the Enlightenment? And he's writing in the early 18th century. Is this thing, the Enlightenment, a good thing? And Rousseau is often misread canonically, I think, as giving a particular answer to this question, a negative answer. No, the progress of the arts and sciences has not made us better. In fact, the powerful thing that he does is to reframe the question, to insist that the Enlightenment is asking the wrong question. He has a particularly powerful footnote about Montaigne, in which he remarks sort of sarcastically and with great enjoyment, I think, that Montaigne observes the happiness and the apparent stability and social solidarity of indigenous peoples in North America. And Montaigne writes at great length about how they seem to have societies that are much better in every respect than European societies. And then, Rousseau comments, Montaigne writes in horror, but they wear no breeches, but they're not dressed like European gentlemen. And so that sort of counteracts all of these other social goods. So the right question for Rousseau is not the question that the Enlightenment asks, which is, do we have lots of knowledge? Do we have lots of culture? But are we free? And are we free in a very particular sense, where not to be free is to be dependent on a power wholly external to ourselves? So if I'm the subject of a king who never interferes with my life, I go about my business entirely as I'd like, Hobbes would say I'm meaningfully free, that the king isn't coming in. And a modern liberal would also say Hobbes is the kind of secret origin point of modern liberalism. The king isn't interfering in my day-to-day affairs. Rousseau would say the fact that at any point the king could do so, the fact that, in other words, I don't actually govern myself, but I'm subject to the arbitrary will of that king, and I'm just lucky that he chooses not to interfere with me, makes me not free. Similarly, and I think powerfully for our purposes, if I'm a smoker, right? If I freely choose to go and buy a pack of cigarettes every day or multiple packs, a modern economist would say, as Hobbes would say, as modern liberals would say, I'm free, right? And Rousseau would say, I'm not morally free. I am a slave to desires which inhibit perhaps my flourishing. They might give me lung cancer and kill me, or they might make me completely miserable every day until I've had my cigarette. And so I'm dependent, not simply on a developed sense of my own will. Now, why does this matter? Why is it important to be free? I think for Rousseau it matters because, this is how I read him anyway, because he thinks that different kinds of people get produced by conditions of freedom or unfreedom. And this is where we get to the beginning of the question of social pathology and capitalism. Now, Rousseau doesn't have that term capitalism, neither by and large does Marx. It's really a late 19th century, early 20th century. Werner Zombart's probably the first person to sort of use it canonically. But Rousseau identifies private property as a key origin point in the second discourse. I mean, he has this extraordinary opening to a section of the second discourse where he says all the evils in the world belong to the first person who put their spade in the ground and said, this is mine, my private property. Private property produces conditions of unfreedom that then produce us in particular ways as particular kinds of people in ways that Rousseau thinks are damaging to us. So